Joining me now to talk about the latest developments from Moscow, Jon Hellvig. He is the managing partner for a leading business firm in Russia. And here with me in Washington is Anton Fedyashin. He is the executive director for Russian culture at the American University. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Anton, let me start with you. It looks like we have the makings of an agreement right now, which is coming out of these diplomatic talks that have been taking place in Geneva. I have the joint statement in front of me here, and the important points are that all sides must refrain from violence, intimidation, or provocative actions. All illegal armed groups must be disarmed. Amnesty will be granted to protesters. There's also talk of long-term constitutional reform. What do you make of it?
Well, it's a good first step to what promises to be a very long-term process, because this looks like something that may put an end to the immediate political crisis in Ukraine, but nothing has been mentioned about economics, which is ultimately the very root cause of what we're seeing in Ukraine now. This is absolutely necessary. This is a great first step. OSCE observers will have to be on the ground to make sure that all of this is being done, because there's a lot of mutual suspicion in Ukraine.
There will be. The statement says that OSCE special monitors will play a leading role.
Let's hope that they play a leading role in all parts of the country, and that Kiev manages to play the role of a moderator who is trusted by all sides.
Okay, let's go to Jon Hellvig in Moscow. And Jon, what do you make of this agreement that's come out of Geneva? Does it, as all sides have been calling for, de-escalate the situation?
Well, we have just had in the news the agreement, or the short statement about that. Now, we don't really know what it means, but the signals that come out are very positive. So we think there's a reason to think that something more positive has been agreed. But really, what is the actual deal they will make, that remains to be seen.
Do you believe, Jon, that Moscow was acting under pressure here, pressure of further sanctions, pressure coming from the fact that NATO was going to deploy more military assets in Eastern Europe?
Well, I think that all parts here are under pressure because EU and USA, which were behind the regime shift in Kiev, they counted their cards wrongly, and things are not playing out on the ground as they would have wished to. Ukraine regime has had a total fiasco on ground with their forces. Regular police did not obey. They went to the side of the protesters in eastern Ukraine. The special forces Alpha didn't go in there. And now we had the total farce with sending the army in there. And also the protesters are fast gaining ground. So clearly the cards on the western side and the regime in Kiev are not strong. Russia, of course, has big pressure of not having a bigger conflict, having a war, because nobody wants to have it. Why would you? Russia needs 10 more years to become strong. And I think what is very important here is that de facto Russia is backed by China. But China is the one that wants least to have any bigger conflicts. So I think that there's pressure from that side also.
Anton, Jon makes a great point there. The fact that you might have a diplomatic agreement coming out of Geneva, but what about the situation on the ground?
Well, the situation on the ground is something that, unfortunately, the Western media and a lot of diplomats have been avoiding very successfully over the past few weeks. We have talked nonstop about sanctions and about NATO movements and Russian military movements, and no one's really been talking about what's going on in Ukraine. And what I see as a positive sign in this agreement is that it finally allows to de-escalate the political situation so that the economic negotiations can finally start. No one will be able to settle the Ukrainian economic woes without direct and very heavy Russian involvement. It is the leading investor, along with Germany, by the way, in the Ukrainian economy. So to cut Russia out to begin with was an absolutely insane idea to start with last fall. So now that we can begin to calm down and hopefully things will develop on the ground as the parties intend, we can start talking about the real problems, which are the economic ones.
John, do you see it that way as well, that there's a good dose of reality that's now been injected into this crisis?
About the economic and political actual situation on the ground. So we start with the Western Ukraine. It started with a very aggressive anti-Russian, and here I don't mean only Russia and the country, but the Russian population of Ukraine. They took over, and then they decided to cut down on the Russian language rights and political rights of the East and so on. And then they saw an uprising there. And the uprising was going actually much better than you see from the Western media. I think there's a huge genuine support for the Russian population. And I think that they want to have a wide autonomy. And here we come to the economic situation, because before you have the political situation agreed and stabilized, there cannot be any improvement in the economic situation. The budget that the regime just announced foresees a 15% budget deficit, 15% to the GDP. So they will be heavily dependent on donors from the West and from Russia. And if the factories, the plants in the eastern Ukraine don't get going, then, you know, and Russia will not buy from them, then the economy will just go bankrupt within half a year.
Anton, what would an economic package look like? And if we see an economic package on the table, will that be acceptable to those groups, pro-Russian groups, who are in eastern Ukraine, calling at best for more autonomy and at worst to reunify with Russia?
Well, the role of the oligarchs and the powerful business clans in eastern Ukraine is something that's also been overlooked lately. And these clans will have an enormous role in what happens in the next few weeks and months. Many people believe that it's been the economic clans that have been fomenting separatist tendencies so that they can then renegotiate their contracts and their business deals with Kiev, because so much of the wealth in eastern Ukraine depends on sort of monopolistic deals that have been struck with different governments over the past 20 years. So how the economy develops in the east is in large part dependent on Russia, on Russian orders to factories, because so much of the economic infrastructure is dependent on the Russian economy. So as far as the eastern part of Ukraine is concerned, Russia will be the main determinant. Most of the Western money will probably end up going to the Western provinces in Ukraine, but everyone needs to remember that it's the eastern and southeastern part of Ukraine that is more economically developed, with a lower rate of unemployment and higher pensions. The western part of Ukraine is actually economically a lot weaker. So that is the basic disbalance that has been driving a lot of political and social and ethno-linguistic controversy that we've seen unfolding over the past couple of months.